Billionaire deliberately tore $100 and gave half to a homeless man to mock him. The ending shocks. Do you want it? The man in the black suit asked coldly, holding up a $100 bill, then suddenly ripped it in half right in front of the trembling beggar. The sound of tearing echoed through the quiet street like a slap to the soul. He handed over one half. Take it. If you want the other half, go get it yourself. The beggar looked up. His sunken eyes, dulled by hunger, flickered with confusion. His trembling hand reached out, hesitant, then took the piece of the bill. The man turned, walked to the gleaming black Rolls-Royce parked at the curb. He placed the other half of the $100 bill on the windshield wiper, then turned without looking back. It's right there. No explanation. No eye contact. The beggar stood up, his legs unsteady, and stepped toward the car as if drawn by a magnet. Just as he reached out, the car inched forward. He stopped, stunned. Was it an accident? He stepped forward again. The moment he neared the car, moved up again. Just a little more. What the hell are you doing? He shouted, his voice raspy from a dry throat. No answer. Only the soft purr of the engine, mocking him. He tried again. And again when the car pulled forward gently, deliberately. Passers-by began to gather. A few pulled out their phones. The beggar now stood confused, humiliated. You think this is funny, he yelled, his eyes red with shame. Still silence. The man remained expressionless behind his sunglasses. Then he opened the car door, leaned out, and looked directly at him with a bored voice. It's within reach. Don't you want it anymore? That line struck like a punch to the gut. The beggar froze, chest heaving. His hand clenched the half bill tightly, crumpling it. People were watching. Someone chuckled. He turned, ready to walk away, but then a sound came from the car. Click, the wiper moved, dropping the bill slightly lower. The beggar looked back. The bill seemed to wait. He stepped forward. No pride, no dignity, just the will to survive. But this time, as he closed the gap, the man slammed the car door, shifted gears, and rolled forward again. The beggar stopped. Not because he was tired, but because he finally realized this wasn't a test of kindness. It was a power game, and he was just the toy. The man didn't wait for a reaction. The car window slowly rolled up, cutting off all connection. The Rolls-Royce sat there like a proud beast, silent but intimidating without even needing to roar. The beggar stepped back. He looked into the shiny black glass, seeing his own face tired, haggard, covered in dust, and small. The mirror in front of him wasn't just a car window. It was the most humiliating reality of his life. It's just half a bill, but why does it feel like my whole life, he muttered. A distant car horn pulled him back to reality. More people started passing by. Some pointed, some whispered. A middle-aged white man wearing AirPods walked past, shaking his head, another loser being tested by a rich psycho. Once again, the beggar turned back toward the car. Now he doesn't walk slowly anymore. He almost rushed toward the car window. The piece of money was still there. He reached out his hand, and this time, the car didn't move. A faint hope flickered. His hand was almost touching the wiper. Suddenly, the wiper flipped up, as if someone controlled it from inside, flinging the bill into the air. Then it landed right by the front wheel. He was stunned. Immediately, the Rolls-Royce revved gently, rolling its tire toward the bill. The tire stopped right in time, crushing the other half of the bill. He was frozen. Enough, he hissed, squeezing the half bill in his hand, now wet with sweat, crumpled to the point of tearing. What do you want? Are you making a video for views? You want to humiliate me in front of everyone, he shouted, his voice trembling as if about to cry. The car door opened again. The man leaned out, this time taking off his sunglasses. His eyes were ash gray, not angry, not mocking, just cold as stone. And I'm not filming. I don't need anyone to watch. I just need you to realize that if you don't stand up for yourself, you only deserve to watch others take away even your last half chance. That sentence cut through the last shred of his pride like a knife. The beggar was silent. After a long moment, he turned and staggered away. But that voice called out behind him. Giving up? I thought you'd do more than that. Hungry enough to almost die, right? He stopped. His shoulders shook. He was crying, but he didn't let anyone see. A child walked by, pushed a half-eaten loaf of bread into his hand, then ran off. He took it but didn't eat, just looked at it. A while later he came back. This time he didn't walk slowly, but hurried toward the car. The rich man was still there. He looked at him, no longer afraid, no longer begging. He just said, "You win. I'll do anything. Just let me have that other half back." The man looked at him for a moment, then nodded. He stepped aside and opened the trunk. Inside was a large old wooden box locked with a chain. "You want money," he said calmly. "Carry this box into that shop over there. Just one simple task." "That shop is yours?" he asked. "No," the man replied, "but I have something stored there. Take it inside, and I'll give you the other half." He looked at the box. Not big, but looked heavy. He nodded. But as soon as he bent down to lift it, he collapsed to the ground. The box was 3 times heavier than he thought. And those dry hands, those legs that hadn't stood firm after 3 days with nothing but rainwater, couldn't bear it. He tried again, grabbing the edge of the trunk to stand up, and tried to lift the other side of the box. His wrist shook. His shoulders slumped. His back bent over. And then, bang, the box hit the ground. People turned to look. The man still said nothing. He just turned back, closed the trunk, and got into the driver's seat. "Take it in." "Then get the money," he said, starting the car again. "That's all." The car went silent again. The beggar sat down on the curb, holding his head in his hands. The story had only just begun. Evening was falling. The dry roadside trees rustled in the light wind, the cold quietly seeping into the skin. The beggar was still sitting by the roadside, next to the heavy wooden box. Sweat soaked through his old coat, his face pale with exhaustion. The Rolls-Royce was still parked there, the engine quietly idling as if dozing off. Inside, the rich man sat motionless, his eyes staring straight ahead as if there was no one outside. The beggar tried to stand up again. His knees trembled violently. He braced himself with his hands, gritted his teeth, and tried to lift the box again. But as soon as he got it a few centimeters off the ground, he swayed and dropped it, slumping back to the ground, panting. A group of pedestrians passed by. Some glanced over. Some shook their heads. No one stopped. He looked around. Then his eyes met 2 figures sitting under an awning a few meters away, 2 other homeless people, an older black man and a skinny young man hugging a torn blanket. The beggar stood up, staggered over. "Can you help me carry that box into the shop? I'll pay each of you $25. Cash. As soon as it's done." The 2 glanced at each other. "Really?" the older man asked, his voice hoarse. "I have half of $100 bill. He's holding the other half. Help me get it inside. I'll share it." The young man jumped up first. "Deal." The other nodded slowly. "I don't like these kinds of games, but for the money." The 3 quietly walked over to the box. They said nothing to the man in the car. They just bent down, lifting the box together slowly but determined. The box groaned with the sound of wood scraping wood, as if protesting. The beggar led the way, opening the restaurant door. An employee inside was about to step out but paused, frowning. "What are you doing?" "I have something to deliver for the restaurant owner," he said, not blinking. "The boss is busy. Please, just let us bring it inside." The employee hesitated, then stepped aside. The 3 carried the box into the shiny, white-tiled lobby, setting it down in the middle of the floor. Right then, a man in a blue shirt stepped out from the back room. He was the owner. "What's this?" he asked him, frowning. The beggar exhaled, stepped forward. "Can I have the other half of the bill?" "Please." He said if I got the box in, it would be done. The owner looked at him as if looking at a madman. "Bill, I don't know who you are." "Who said to give you money?" "The man outside the black Rolls-Royce," he said. "I have nothing to do with that car, and I have no idea what you're talking about." The beggar frozen. "No, it can't be." He stepped back, looking out the window. The Rolls-Royce was gone. "No, no way," he yelled, running out the door, dashing into the street. The black car had disappeared. Only a faint tire mark remained on the sidewalk. The beggar screamed. He tricked me. He disappeared. The restaurant owner followed him outside. I don't know who you are, but if you cause any more trouble outside my restaurant, I'll call the police. The beggar stepped back, hands shaking. I just wanted to get paid, just a little. But the security guard had already come out. You need to leave, right now. The beggar stumbled away, heading back toward the two homeless men. But before he could speak, the young man punched him straight in the face. Bastard, you made us work for nothing. He collapsed onto the concrete, blood trickling from his mouth. The older black man walked over, kicked him in the stomach. Thought there was real money? Wait, I didn't know. He would disappear. Shut up. Another kick. The beggar curled up on the ground, holding his head, not resisting. He let the physical pain wash over everything. He had lost faith, lost even the last bit of hope. When the other two left, he still lay there, motionless. Only the sound of traffic and footsteps seemed to fall from another world. After a while, he rolled over, still clutching his stomach, lips moving. Why me? Why does it have to be me? Then he felt something in his breast pocket. He reached in and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was the recruitment flyer the restaurant owner had shoved into his hand earlier, just before kicking him out. Printed on the paper. Now hiring kitchen assistant, no experience required. Meals and lodging provided. Starting pay 8 hour. Apply in person at the counter. The beggar stared at the words. His hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but because he was torn, was this just another trap or a real chance? The beggar stood for a long time in front of the recruitment flyer. The sun had shifted, light spilling in blotches through the torn shop signs. The crumpled paper in his hand was just a faintly printed sheet on white. But right now, it was the only thing that hadn't lied to him all day. He walked toward the restaurant door again. This time there was no box, no anger or challenge. Just a hungry man, holding a piece of paper, eyes lowered, quietly saying to the guard, I'm here to apply for a job. The security guard recognized him. He frowned, but glanced at the flyer. It seemed he knew it belonged to the restaurant. Wait here, he said, then went inside. A few minutes later, a woman came out. White shirt, hair tied back, calm expression. I'm the manager. What do you need? The beggar handed out the paper, silently. The manager looked him over from head to toe. Dirty clothes, trembling hands and feet, a burnt, foul odor. She let out a very soft breath. We need a dishwasher and kitchen helper. If you really work, you'll have a place to sleep, 2 meals a day, and hourly pay. He asked nothing more. Just nodded. Start today, she asked. Right now, he replied. The manager looked at him one last time and nodded. Follow me. That evening, he started his first shift ever in the restaurant's kitchen. No one spoke to him. No one asked his name. There were only hot water buckets, cleaning rags, and the sound of knives hitting cutting boards in the cramped space. After 4 hours, his hands were blistered, his legs aching, his collar greasy. But he didn't complain. He didn't even rest. He just kept working, one job after another, until an old chef patted him on the shoulder. Stop. Take a break. Come back early tomorrow. He bowed his head. Thank you. No one knew. When he washed his hands in the bathroom, he cried. Not from pain, but because for the first time in years, he had a real job. For the next 3 months, he didn't take a single day off. Up at 5 a.m. Imam, working until 10 p. Sturmery Sartso. Eating leftover food in the kitchen, then sleeping on a bunk bed behind the storeroom. Every time he got paid, he kept back 1 coin to put in a cardboard box, the only thing left from his old life. But he didn't forget. In a corner of his personal locker, he kept the wrinkled half of a $100 bill. He wrapped it carefully in a plastic zip bag, sealed tight. Whenever he felt so exhausted he wanted to give up, he took it out and looked at it. Not to remember that man, but to remember himself the day he was tested, humiliated, and nearly gave up. One evening, while cleaning the storeroom, he found something familiar, the old wooden box. The same box he couldn't carry in 3 months ago. It had been shoved into the back, covered in dust, with a delivery tag stuck to it. He looked at it, didn't touch it, just stood there a long time. In his mind, that cold voice echoed, "If you don't stand up for yourself, you only deserve to watch others take away your last half chance." This time, he wrapped his arms around the box, lifted it without anyone's help. He carried it into storage, cleaned off the dust. What was inside, he didn't know, but that no longer mattered. The next day, he asked for more hours, then asked to learn kitchen prep, then learned how to keep the books. When he wasn't working, he read books in the kitchen corner. No one told him to do it. He chose to. The old manager left 6 months later, and he was nominated to take her place. 1 year after being tricked on the street, he had his own room, a desk, and his name printed on an employee badge. One early spring morning, as he was checking orders in the storeroom, an employee came in and reported, "There's a strange customer asking to see the manager. He says he'll only talk to the person who used to wash dishes here." He looked up, was silent for a few seconds, then stepped outside. Waiting at the reception desk was a tall white man in a light gray suit. His face was serious, but his eyes looked a little uneasy. He didn't recognize this man. "You're the one who used to be a kitchen helper here?" the man asked. "Yes, sir, one. I'm the manager now. What do you want?" The other man looked at him for a few seconds, then took out a wallet, opened it, and quietly held it out to him. In the main compartment of the wallet was a torn half of a $100 bill. His whole body froze. "You?" He couldn't finish the sentence. His hand trembled. Unable to hold back, he pulled from the drawer a plastic zip bag. Inside was the other half he had kept for 3 years. He placed both pieces of the bill on the table. They matched perfectly. No more words were needed. He understood everything. The man in front of him was not a stranger. He was the man from years ago. No Rolls Royce anymore. No powerful black suit. But the eyes, the presence, the way he watched people, unmistakable. "It's you," he whispered. "You were the one who pushed me to the bottom." The other man nodded slightly. "I didn't push you. I just reminded you that you were already there." There was a few seconds of silence. Then he asked, very softly, "Why?" The other man looked him straight in the eyes. "Because if I had given you money that day, you would have spent it within an hour. But if you failed at the right time, then 3 years later, you would have everything." He was speechless. The man turned to go, but before leaving, he paused. "That box from that day, do you remember it?" "I do." It contained glass ornaments. Fragile, suerschanten, very valuable. "I was supposed to send it, but I wanted to see who could carry it without breaking it." "You couldn't do it." "But you found someone to help him. That was the first time you shared responsibility. But I still didn't get the money. Because you weren't ready yet." He nodded. No more anger. Only a wordless gratitude. The man walked out the door. He called after him, "Wait, do you need something to eat, my treat?" The other man turned and smiled. "No, but take good care of this place. Maybe someone like you 3 years ago will come in, and they'll need a chance, too." The door closed behind him. The man who used to beg now, the manager looked at the two halves of the bill, now joined together and neatly placed on the table. The whole kitchen behind him was still busy, but in that moment, time seemed to stop. A week after the reunion, he began to feel uneasy. Not because that man came back, but because he disappeared completely. No name, no sign left behind, as if that meeting had only been an illusion. But what kept him up at night was that $100 bill. The two halves had been joined, lying in his desk drawer. He used to keep one half like a treasure, but now, when it was whole, it made him restless. Late one night, he took it out, put it on the table, and stared at the tier where the two pieces were joined. His hand ran gently along the torn edge. Suddenly, he noticed something strange. Between the two halves of the bill, there was a faint ink line like handwriting. He took out a magnifying glass and examined it closely. Under the desk lamp, very tiny letters appeared, almost invisible. "Back to where you were broken." His heart tightened. That line couldn't be a coincidence. It was written in the middle of the tier, which meant it had been there before the bill was ripped. He stood up, opened the cabinet, and took out the surveillance footage from the day that man came. But in the video, when he pulled out his wallet, the image was overexposed. The details on the bill couldn't be seen clearly. Everything seemed arranged. He held the bill and looked at the words again. Back to where you were broken. His heart pounded. There was only one place that fit those words. That old street corner, where the man had torn the bill, where he had been tricked, where he had screamed, where he had been beaten for a broken promise. The next day, when the restaurant closed after the evening shift, he left without telling anyone. The coat he wore that day, the shoes now replaced, but his eyes tonight looked a lot like 3 years ago, suspicious, alone, and carrying a big question that no one could answer. The street corner was still there. The old lamp still flickered at 11 p. In Rewan, the abandoned bus stop, the cracked sidewalk, even the faded paint on the roadside sign, all were unchanged. Only he was different. He stood on the sidewalk, at the spot where the Rolls-Royce had once parked. In his hand was the rejoined $100 bill. He raised it up, looking at the words under the pale yellow light. Back to where you were broken. The night wind blew cold. The street was empty. He was about to leave when, swish, a piece of paper flew past his feet. He bent down to pick it up. It was a torn advertisement flyer, but on the back, there was a handwritten note. If you truly understand why, go to 17 Mason Street, alone. He looked up and around, no one. But he knew clearly, this was not over. It was only just beginning. He stood still in the middle of the street, the handwritten flyer still in his hand. 17 Mason Street. Numerous. Alone. The simple words echoed in his head like a command. He checked his watch. It was nearly midnight. The wind had turned cold, bringing the damp, sticky smell of the city, the very smell he would never forget. The smell of the night when everything in his life collapsed. The old rented room where he had lived 3 years ago was still clear in his memory. So vivid it was chilling. 4 peeling walls, a ceiling stained yellow from leaks, a window blocked with cardboard. He used to live there, a packing technician at a small factory in the suburbs. The job wasn't good, but it was enough. He had a work schedule, a pay slip, and a homemade dinner. Until the day he accidentally ruined a shipment going to Canada. A simple mistake mislabeled the lot, but the consequences were serious. The whole shipment was returned, causing tens of thousands in losses, and the small company couldn't bear it. You're fired, the manager said coldly. No unemployment benefits, since it's your own fault. He tried to beg. He explained the reasons: understaffed, overtime, exhaustion. But no one listened. 3 days later, he was kicked out of his rented room for not paying rent. That night, he slept in a park, the wooden bench under a chestnut tree, his head soaked by rain, his back aching from the night wind. The sound of rain hitting the leaves, the distant car horns mixing with the rumbling of his stomach. He had once been someone who could read data, coordinate processes. Now, he was just a wet body lying under a sky no one remembered. The next day, he walked nearly 10 miles just to ask for a construction job. But people looked at him: muddy clothes, torn shoes, scruffy beard, and shook their heads without any sympathy. No bums hired. I used to be a technical worker. Well, not anymore. Within a week, he learned one thing: your past means nothing if your present is a wreck. All his savings were gone. Friends, no one picked up the phone anymore. He had thought of calling his mother, but the last time she called, he hung up halfway because he was working overtime. Now, he didn't know what to say. That evening, he walked past a restaurant. The smell of grilled meat from the kitchen vent squeezed his heart. He stood there, swallowed hard, then went in and asked to wash dishes. The owner looked him up and down, then handed him a rag. No pay, just a meal. One meal, we asked for the one. He nodded. No bargaining. After washing nearly 80 plates, he was given a bowl of cold soup and a dry loaf of bread. He ate as if he had never eaten before. But as he was leaving, the owner added, "Don't come back. This isn't a charity." At that moment, he knew clearly if he didn't change, he would die slowly, like garbage on the sidewalk. After the night he was thrown out of the restaurant, he wandered the city in the biting cold. The help wanted signs on windows were no longer hope, they seemed like fate's cruel joke. He used to think of himself as someone who seized opportunities, worked hard, and strove to improve. But with an empty stomach and torn shoes, society no longer cared who he once was. One night, he was so exhausted he couldn't lift his feet, collapsing next to a dumpster behind a bakery. His head hit the edge of the metal bin. Blood oozed from his temple. He lay motionless for nearly an hour. No one noticed. Distant police sirens, cat cries, the stench of garbage and the smell of burnt bread mingled until it was nauseating. After a while, someone shook him. "Hey, mister, are you still alive?" It was a girl, not more than 14, wearing a bakery delivery uniform. He couldn't open his eyes, only nodded faintly. "I don't have much, but I'll leave you this meal." Okay, her voice was small but clear. When he opened his eyes, she was gone. Next to him was a small paper bag. Inside was an egg roll sandwich, a box of milk, and a folded note. He ate slowly, each bite like someone starving being saved. Then he opened the note. It was a handwritten line in purple ink. "Every day can be a new beginning. Don't let the past drown you." He broke down in tears. For the first time in weeks, he let himself cry, not from hunger, not from pain, but because a stranger remembered he was human. The next morning, he went to the restaurant with the bakery bag. It was the place where, 3 years later, he would become manager. At that time, he had nothing left to lose. No pride, no name, no goal. But because of that, he could start again, from zero. And he did start again. From the first bucket of water, from the first burn in the kitchen, from the short naps on the storeroom floor, and from the last hope, rekindled by a stranger girl's note. Now, standing on the old street with a $100 bill in hand, he no longer felt ashamed. He felt grateful. Grateful that he had collapsed. Grateful that he had not died. Grateful that he got the chance to rise again. The wind blew harder. He folded the bill, put it in his inner pocket, and walked away. 17 Mason Street, noon tomorrow. And this time, he would not walk there as a beggar. The next noon, he arrived in front of 17 Mason Street, an old 3-story building. The facade made of faded red bricks. The sign missing half its letters. The front door was closed, no one inside. But on the window frame there was a small note. "Use the back entrance." He walked around a narrow alley where sunlight didn't reach. The smell of damp moss and peeling paint reminded him of the days he used to sleep here. A rusty metal door appeared. When he touched it, it swung open on its own, as if someone had been waiting. Inside was a staircase leading down to the basement. No lights, only a thin string of bulbs hanging along the railing, flickering irregularly like a waiting heartbeat. He walked down, each step echoing a cold, hollow sound. At the end of the hallway was an iron door, unlocked. He pushed it open. A bare room, 4 walls covered in mirrors. In the middle of the room stood a wooden chair. On the chair was a black notebook, no name, no label. He stepped closer, touched the rough leather cover. On the first page, only one line written in black ink. "Welcome back to where it all began." No one appeared. No sound. Only his own breathing, heavy, pounding, then gradually slowing. He sat down on the chair. His hands turned the next pages. Inside were photographs, black and white prints, including him lying next to the dumpster behind the bakery, him carrying a bucket of water in the kitchen, hands red and blistered. Him standing in front of his first payslip, him holding the bread roll the girl had given. Each photo was a slice of his life, recorded like a diary, but he had never taken them. No one had. The last page of the notebook was a photo of the man from years ago, but this time he was standing in this very room, looking straight into the camera. A chill ran down his spine. Right then, the room's lights flickered. Then a voice rang out from the speaker on the ceiling, deep, clear, and familiar. "You came. But are you sure you truly understand why I did all of this?" He stood up. "Is that you? Where are you?" There was no direct answer. Only the sound of the door opening behind him. Light flooded in, and the voice continued. "Keep going. The answer is ahead. But this time, no one will push you. You have to move forward on your own. He gripped the notebook tightly and walked through the door. The lights grew brighter. The narrow hallway stretched straight to the end where blinding white light was waiting. And he knew this time, he wasn't here to beg for anything, but to face the truth. He walked to the end of the hallway, where white light shone from the gap in the half-closed door. His hand rested on the icy metal handle. That brief moment stretched out like a lifetime, just like the first time he entered the restaurant 3 years ago. Empty-handed, hungry, and with broken faith. The door opened smoothly, without a sound. In front of him was a large, empty room, with only a round table placed in the center and 2 chairs facing each other. On the table was a glass of water and a thick yellow envelope. On the envelope, a handwritten line, very neat. Thus, for the survivor, he hadn't yet entered when that voice rang out again this time, from the man himself stepping out from the dark corner of the room. It was him. Still the cold eyes. Still that slow walk, as if he never needed to hurry. But today, the man was no longer in a suit. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, as if this meeting wasn't a test, but a handover. "Hello." The man's voice was deeper than he remembered. "It's you," he said softly, his eyes never leaving him. "It's me." The man approached, not sitting down. He stood, his hand resting on the envelope, then gently pushed it toward him. 3 years. You still kept it." He knew what he meant. "The bill, not just kept it," he replied. "I lived with it." The man nodded. "Good at him, and way that him on good. Then you're ready for the truth." He didn't answer, only gripped the chair's armrest tighter. The man turned slightly, one hand in his pocket, his eyes looking around the room. "This place used to be my company's main office," he said. "We started here. Only 4 people, 1 table, and 2 computers. Now the company's been sold, but I kept this building because I needed a place to test people." He frowned slightly. "You weren't the first," the man continued, "but you were the first to keep half the bill and not use it as an excuse to resent life." "So, it was all an experiment?" he asked, his voice slow and deep. "It was an opportunity. I don't owe anyone a chance. But if someone is persistent enough to reach the end, then I give them what they truly deserve. And if they don't," he asked again, "then they just go back to where they started." The man said firmly. A silence passed. No one spoke. They just stood there, like 2 question marks facing each other, one from the past, one from the present. Then the man placed a hand on his shoulder. "In the envelope is a contract. You have the right to refuse. But if you sign, you'll run an investment fund, starting capital, $2 million. No conditions attached. No debt. But there is one requirement." "What is it?" he asked. "You have to choose someone else to do the same. And it will be your hand that tears the bill in half." He was stunned by those words. "I have to tear the bill myself?" he asked again, as if to make sure he hadn't misheard. The man nodded. "Yes, and someone else. Somewhere else. A new situation. But the old rule, no explanation, no help, no revealing. Just set up the situation and watch what they do. And if they fail, then they don't get another chance. Opportunity comes only once." He stepped back, his eyes on the envelope. In his mind echoed images of himself curled up in the rain, bottles rattling in a supermarket cart, the face of the homeless man who once hit him, and the smile of the girl who gave him a bread roll and a handwritten note. "Why me?" he asked. "Why let me choose the next person? I'm not you." The man smiled softly, not contemptuous, not mocking. "Precisely because you're not me, because you once hated me, because you know what it's like to be dragged to the bottom with no one to help. You lived through it. And now, if you give that chance to someone else, you'll do it differently or repeat it exactly. You're testing me again." "No," he shook his head. "I'm inviting you to step into the position of the one who creates the game." He turned away, saying nothing. His heart was pounding. The envelope seemed 10 times heavier than its actual weight. It didn't just hold a contract. It held power, responsibility, and the potential to recreate pain. He turned back to look at the man. "How many people like me Didn't make it. The man was silent for a moment, then answered more than 20. And you don't regret it. Regret, he repeated. You're standing here living proof that the method works. I don't care about cruelty, only about effectiveness. He clenched his fists, his eyes darkened. So what are you, a savior or just a gambler betting on other people's misery? The man wasn't angry. He only shrugged. I was once poorer than you, and no one pulled me up. I learned to crawl up with my own fingernails. Another silence fell over the room. Then the man took out a wallet from his jacket pocket, an old, dark leather wallet, just like the one he had 3 years ago. He took out a crisp new $100 bill. He tore it in half right in front of him, then handed him one half. If you're not ready, I'll find someone else. But if you keep this, you've accepted the new role. He looked at the new half bill in his hand. The paper still smelled of fresh ink, not yet creased, but the feeling inside him was a chaos he couldn't name. Before, when he held the old half bill, he only had hunger, anger, and humiliation. Now, having everything, it felt like he was holding a weapon. The man sat down in the opposite chair, silently watching. He didn't rush him. No pressure. That only made the situation even more suffocating. Do you know I almost died because of that half bill, he asked, his voice deep. I know, the other replied. I used to hate you. Wanted to burn that bill, throw it in your face if I ever saw you again. But you didn't. Because I understood, it changed me. But understanding doesn't mean I forgive. The man smiled faintly, as if he'd heard that line hundreds of times. He stood up, walked around the room, the half bill still in his hand. Each step was a stretch of memory, the face of the child who shared bread, blistered hands in the kitchen, the cold eyes of those who once rejected him. So if I agree, what do I do? Find someone and repeat what you did, he asked, stopping behind the other man. Not repeat. Create your own version. The situation is yours to choose. The person is yours to decide. But the principle stays no revealing, no helping, no pity. Let them walk on their own or not. And if I refuse, then you keep your current life. But you'll never know if you could have given someone else a new life. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. In his mind, 2 words echoed, go on or stop. You once said if you don't stand up for yourself, you don't deserve the other half. But have you ever thought sometimes people don't need a lesson, just a hand to pull them up? The other man was silent for a long time, then answered, that hand is the one you're holding. That sentence made him freeze. For a moment, he saw himself, standing on both sides, the one once left behind, and the one now deciding someone else's fate. He slowly returned to the table, placed the half bill next to the envelope, said nothing, just sat down, hands clasped together. Then I'll try, he said, looking straight ahead. Not like you, not repeating to you. I'll create a better version. But I want a condition. What is it? If the other person fails, I won't abandon them. I'll reach out my hand. The man looked up, then nodded slowly. All right. Then let's begin. Hirachiku. 2 weeks later, at an old bus station on the outskirts of the city, it was drizzling. A young woman, frizzy hair, faded denim jacket, pulling a torn suitcase, stood huddled in front of the station door. An old car stopped. The man in the driver's seat got out. It was him. White shirt, carrying a paper bag. No Rolls Royce, no black suit. He walked up to the girl, handed her a paper bag and a bill, a whole $100 note. What do you need most right now, he asked. She hesitated, a meal or an opportunity. He gave her both, but he didn't stop there. He pointed to the car. There's a file in the car. A job, you can try, not required. But if you want it, you must get there before 6 p. Imminent. Today. How far? 10 miles or Disharam. My car won't go. You have to get there on your own. She was silent. Her eyes looked at him, full of doubt. Who are you? I used to be someone like you. No pressure. No on our row one. No threat. No tricks. He turned, got in the car, and drove away, leaving the girl with the choice. The car rolled slowly along the rain-soaked road. In the rearview mirror, he saw the girl still standing there, holding the bill and paper bag, hesitating. The voice of the man from years ago echoed in his mind. If no one pulls you up, then be the first to pull someone else up. He didn't need to see the outcome. Because he knew sometimes, just having someone believe you deserve a chance is enough. A month later, in the conference room of a downtown hotel, a charity seminar was held with hundreds of guests. Reporters, investors, and business leaders of all sizes were present. The topic of the day, second chances and the model of rebuilding people. The opening speaker was not a CEO or a famous philanthropist. It was him, the man who had once been thrown off the sidewalk, who had begged in the street with half of a torn $100 bill. He stepped up to the podium. No microphone, no PowerPoint. Only one thing in his hand, the black notebook, the book that recorded his journey. He opened the first page, read the line, "Welcome back to where it all began." Then he looked up at the audience. "I don't have an MBA. I never led a big company. I once washed dishes, wandered the streets, was humiliated just for being hungry. And I was changed just because of half a bill." The room was silent. I'm not here today to express gratitude. I'm here to declare the challenge model that someone once called a test of character will be changed. There was a murmur in the crowd. Cameras turned. A man sitting in the middle row, the man from years ago, crossed his legs, folded his arms, his gaze calm. He continued, "I was given the right to remake that model, and I chose not to tear the bill. I chose to believe in someone else." He held up a photo of the girl with frizzy hair standing in front of the bus station. She walked 10 miles in the rain, not for money, but because she believed she could be different. She's now working in my restaurant, learning the trade. Your fetish or has a place to live, and doesn't know she was part of an experiment. The other man narrowed his eyes. A reporter pointed a camera at him. A microphone pushed close. "What do you think about this new approach?" they asked. He smiled very gently. "He's no longer me." And that is a good thing. The whole hall applauded, not thunderously, but sincerely. After the seminar, news outlets simultaneously reported, "Former homeless man leads the new second chance model. Ex-beggar challenges the ruthless testing system." Social media was flooded with images from the conference. But the focus was not on the main character. It was on the old man who had once tested him 3 years ago. Pictures showed him sitting silently in a sea of cameras. His face no longer cold with authority, but with the silence of someone who had been replaced, surpassed by his own creation. In the hotel lobby, crowds gathered around him. Journalists asked questions. Young people held out notebooks for autographs. A boy about 10 pushed a slip of paper into his hand. "I want to start over too." He looked at the boy and nodded gently. "You've already started the moment you wrote that line." Far away, the other man stood by the exit. He took off his sunglasses, put them in his pocket, and walked away. No one stopped him. No one saw him off. On the electronic board in the lobby, large letters read, "Nothing is free but chances can be given, if someone dares to believe." And outside the hotel doors, a woman with frizzy hair, the same girl from the bus station, was handing out flyers that read, "Hiring no degree required. Only trust." A month after the seminar, the sign of the restaurant where he once washed dishes was replaced. The old name was gone. The new sign simply read, "The second table." Underneath, a slogan was engraved on steel. "Everyone deserves a chance to sit down again." No advertising, no viral campaigns. But every day there was a line of people at the door, not just asking for a job, but asking for a chance. Every morning, in the small kitchen, he still wore an apron, checking the gas stove just like on his first day. New staff didn't know he had once been homeless. They only saw a manager working from 5 Ari Nurse Siri Durdas, remembering everyone's name and never asking, "Where's your degree?" only, "Are you ready to start today?" In a small corner at the back of the kitchen, there was a wooden frame on the wall, holding just one thing. Half of the old torn bill, clipped beside the other half, two pieces once separated, now under glass like an untouchable keepsake. No one was allowed to touch it, but everyone could see it, and everyone understood it was not just a decoration. Once a month, he would pack a paper bag himself, a sandwich, a box of milk, and a handwritten note. He never wrote the exact same words as before, but each note carried a version of the same message. Tomorrow can be different if you stand up today. He left those bags at bus stops, in wall niches, on park benches. No one knew who left them, but some people found their way here, and a few of them stayed. One Sunday morning, as he stepped out of the restaurant, a scene made him stand still. On the sidewalk across the street, there were more than 30 people homeless, unemployed youths, single mothers standing in a long line. They weren't noisy, they didn't push. Each person held the same kind of paper bag, with a messy handwritten line on the outside. The second table, don't refuse when you're hungry. A young woman stepped out of the line, came up to him, and shyly said, "We didn't come to ask for food. We came to ask to learn. Could you teach us how to start?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, then at the line of people, all with the same eyes he had years ago, anxious, fragile, but with one thing: they'd never lost hope. He went back into the kitchen, brought out an apron, and handed it to her. "Start by washing dishes. Tonight, you'll learn to make soup." The girl paused for a moment, then nodded. From then on, every week, he spent 2 sessions teaching basic life skills: cooking, bookkeeping, reading contracts, how to open a bank account. No curriculum, no whiteboard, just someone experienced showing the newly fallen how to stand up again. On social media, people started calling this model Redemption Kitchen. No one remembered his real name anymore. They only called him by a new title: the man who gave out half a bill. And in every window at the back of the restaurant, there was the same image posted: a $100 bill, torn in two but sewn back together, with a blurred line underneath. No one truly loses their value. They just need someone to remember they were once worth something. Have you ever wondered if half a bill could change an entire life? Not because of its value, but because of the lesson it leaves behind. We often hope to be helped, to be given opportunities. But have you ever asked yourself, if you were the one holding half the bill, what would you do? Would you turn away when you saw someone stumble? Or would you be brave enough to stop, reach out your hand, and say, "I was once like you, and you can be like me"? If you've ever witnessed injustice, if you've ever seen someone left behind just because they were poor, powerless, or failed, don't just scroll past. Leave a comment. Share a story you've seen. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to hand half a bill to someone who needs it. Stay until the end. The twist will redefine what redemption truly means. If you witnessed injustice like this, what would you do? Comment below. Subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, where kindness sparks redemption and silence breaks power.